Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Wilber, and I'm Curator of Public Programs at the Museum of Wisconsin Art. I was also one of the curators of our current exhibition, Claiming Space, A New Century of Visionary Women. So this year, MOA is celebrating through the exhibition and just through all of 2021, our 60th anniversary, as well as women artists in Wisconsin and our female founder of the museum. And in Claiming Space, I have two incredibly talented artists with me today, Niki Johnson and Valaria Tatera. I was super honored to work with them in the exhibition, and I'm really excited to have them here tonight talking with us about their work. I'm sure you're just going to be fascinated by everything that you have to say. I've had conversations with both of them in the gallery in front of their work, and I'm amazed at what they do. So Niki Johnson is an artist. She's an activist. She's a curator and a speaker. She lives in Milwaukee, as does Valaria. She's invested in creating artwork that addresses power structures, equality, and identity. Valaria is also a Milwaukee-based installation artist, activist, lecturer, whose work investigates the intersection of ethnicity, gender, commerce, and the environment. Her intention with her work is to create a physical manifestation of work that holds visual and personal space for statistics that often erase the individual. Hi, ladies. How you doing tonight?
Good.
Good. Excited.
Great. Yeah, excited to have you here. I guess one of the questions that I want to open up with for both of you, really, while we start here, both of your work in Claiming Space, Niki, you have 3 pieces in the exhibition. Val, you have 1 piece in the exhibition, one very glorious space holding piece in the exhibition. I think they're made out of what people would call non-traditional media. It's not a painting per se. It's not a drawing. It's not charcoal on paper. These are things made out of plates and buttons and glass and ribbons. I guess I'm just kind of curious, do you remember the moment that you looked at, let's say for the sake of this moment, the plates, Niki, or the ribbons, Val, and decided to use it in artwork? Like, do you remember the moment that you had that kind of like, aha, I'm going to be making a piece with this?
Want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess for me, it was watching dancers dance in the regalia, and how ribbons are very important in our regalia as well as in our history of ribbon applique. And so I was looking for a way to fill space and talk about really hard-hitting statistics that oftentimes are very emotional. And so I was always trying to think of how do you pair really hard information with to make it easier access for the viewer, and ribbons just seem to have called to me. I love the way they sound, they feel, and just how they look.
Mm-hmm. And certainly how they shimmer in the space. Kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think with my practice, what I've found is that materials tend to find me more so than I gravitate towards a material. Oftentimes I will find myself compelled to load something into my cart at a thrift store and just mosey on. Over time, the plates specifically, I ended up amassing a collection of them. And it took, I think it was over 10 years. I mean, it wasn't out of fandom per se, as much as the way that the images of the like father knows best, women in their place, children always smiling, no people of color anywhere. As I was loading these into my cart, it was with a bit of like feminist schadenfreude. I was like, blah, like these were once collector's items and now the stores can't even move them for $3 each, right? So I was loading them into my cart, and I knew at some point I'd do something or otherwise just feel kind of foolish about shedding a little bit of money. And there's always eBay, right? So like I tucked them in a corner, and then in a period of like soul searching and listening to a ton of Leonard Cohen just following the 2016 presidential election, I was going through all of my belongings and just trying to make sense of what had just happened. And I stumbled upon a point and shoot photograph that was accidentally taken. So I think it was the color palette that first my brain kind of put together. Immediately, I realized that the image of me, I just taken off my leathers. I had finished casting iron with a group of people in New Mexico, which is where I'm from. The picture was taken just a few months before I packed all my belongings, dropped out of college, and kind of began the path to self-actualization. So it was like this really pivotal moment in my early 20s where I was about to call out my future. And the way that kind of sat with the narratives of the Norman Rockwell was something I got to examine, study, read about over the year and a half it took me to produce the piece.
So you collected these plates. You said you started 10 years ago?
About, yeah.
How many years before you started using them in your work? I think you do have some other previous pieces. Nope. No, not with those?
Different? You know what? You're right. But they're so like kind of insignificant in my head. I did mess with other plates. And part of it was that when I was in graduate school, one of my professors pointed out that I was building my own prison with my processes because they're so belabored. And it was, I was like, don't point that out. I'm quite comfy in this cage, but it did make me think that I needed to embrace recess and be able to work faster. And there was something about the plates and actually being within the atmosphere of a thrift store that really, I grew up in thrift stores. My dad was a counselor who helped counsel people at Goodwill on a job training program for a number of years. And so I would come after school and, wait until he was done and then we would head out. So javeling around on crutches and trying not to break things, but being there, that was part of my childhood. So thrift stores for me have always been a generative space to find material. So I went there to try to figure out if I could establish a new kind of practice within my own way of working. And the plates were the beginning.
The plates were the beginning.
Yeah, so it was erasure. I would quickly erase parts of them and kind of mess with the narrative really directly on the plate. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a while and then kind of felt like it was almost too, I felt like if I didn't watch myself, the adjustments I was making were going to become too pithy, too easy, too just too postmodern critiquey, what I could do in that moment of erasure was it didn't make me examine my purpose. And once again, I figured out a way to build a cage for myself with plates. And that's why that piece took me a year and a half to make. And I love, it's a piece I feel very close to.
Okay, yeah. You're referring to I was referring to the other plates. Yeah, the erasure plates, other pieces that Niki has made from Norman Rockwell collector plates, erasing a certain part of them to change the narrative, which is very similar to what we're discussing today with these other works. But you said you weren't terribly satisfied with that process. It wasn't laborious enough. Maybe we'll talk in a minute a little bit about your process with those.
I don't think it was those. There's the labor, but then there's this other part too of I'm proud of the pieces that I did make. I just felt like I kind of had pushed it as far as I could go.
Fair.
And it was time to, deal with them in another way. And it just took time to figure out how to do that.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of taking these plates and cutting them up and turning them into the painting? How did you do that? Did you know going into it, how you could slice them up so cleanly? I think most people would just smash them, with a hammer to make small pieces, but that's not what you did.
Well, I do employ beauty within my work as kind of like the carrot that entices people to get closer. There's definitely room for work out there that deals with, the uncanny and smashing and the grotesque and the violent. And I think there's room for all of it. In general, I tend to work in a kind of a tidy way that I wouldn't really call it craft because it's still too messy. It's still sculpture in a lot of ways. But like my craft friends, my God, it's amazing how tight. But yeah, so what I did with those is, it's I just cut them up with a tile saw. And just changed out the blades so that I wouldn't chip up the glazes. And, I'd switch the blades between like when I needed to chew off the feet off the back of the plate versus like when I was making bacon strips, or like taking those 1-inch bacon strips and then making them into little 1-inch squares. From there, I cut up about 300 plates into about 9,000 pieces so that I could cull 2,400 of the right color and like with the right pattern on it to be able to build the image.
And how much time did you spend sawing up these plates?
I don't know. I know that in the summer I work outside, and in the winter I used hot water in the tile saw so my hands wouldn't go numb. And when the water would get too cold, I just swap it out for more hot water and get back to work. There were times where it took me 18 months to make the piece, but there were some sanity breaks in there because that it's kind of one hell of a puzzle. Yeah, I mean, there was always work to be done. I can say that much.
18 months. Yeah, I remember you telling me that. And then you organized those squares that you'd sawed into containers of colors. Like
trays. Yeah.
Yeah, very neatly organized. Just your whole studio full of these squares.
Mm-hmm.
You started to touch on this. Well, if you did touch on this, I was going to ask you who the woman in the portrait is. It's you. Yeah,
as I said before, it was just like a point and shoot picture from, I believe, a Vivitar back in the days of film, and it was an accidental photo in a roll. So I'm guessing that we were taking pictures during the pour, and then afterwards. I don't know what happened, but that image was captured, and it just happened to, survive 20 some odd years of living in a box as I've traveled around the country and lived my life.
Mm-hmm. We kind of spoke a little bit in the gallery one day about it's a portrait of you. It's a portrait of you in this really important time of change in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a portrait without a face. And some people have asked me off to the side, like, why isn't there a head on this woman? What does this mean? And what are your thoughts on that? Like why it's relevant to have this portrait of you as the subject matter for this piece made of Norman Rockwell plates and without a face even?
Well, well, I mean, in all honesty, it was like a literal photograph. And I responded to the photograph that I found because it, in my mind, turned into something made out of the plates, and then I just did it. It really wasn't a point of question. In fact, with this piece, I promised myself for the first 6 months that I wouldn't show it, that it was just for me. And it was the way that I created a protective space around the process of making, in which I got to shut the audience out and just simply begin to manifest something that I knew held meaning. And it was over the course of the time that I made it that I had a number of people over to my studio, and the young women in particular responded to the piece and had their own stories. And I thought, well, I think this, it's important to me that all my work be of service in some way to the greater population. At least that's my hope. And so in creating an image of myself, I wasn't sure if that would be possible, but it seems to be doing its work. So as far as like a headless woman thing, I would point out that agency, like the agents of change and making in our lives, are our hands. And those are prominent in this piece. I mean, it would have been amazing if this picture had captured my head, but it didn't, and I wasn't going to stick a head on it if that wasn't there, because that wasn't what I responded to. But the idea that I think what happens is people are allowed to step into the image themselves, and Yeah, no, I think that those are all valid questions too. I mean, if imagery like this makes people uncomfortable because there is no head attached, that is a conversation that I'd be interested in listening to more about. With work, I think the most important thing is to be able to posit strong questions in front of people and get them into a space of reflecting upon their own lives rather than delivering answers.
Certainly, and there's a lot of that at the museum, I feel, with these conversations in front of the artwork and really instant questions that people have. And I don't always have the answers, but I'm always happy to talk to you ladies about it after the fact and hear these well thought out answers. So one more question that I have about this piece, Niki, is the commentary in this piece focused more specifically about commemorative plates or Rockwell's paintings, both in some way? Like, kind of what's the pin pointing at in this work conceptually?
Well, I think when I began it, I was at this point of trying to figure out how women like me were supposed to fit within the construct of MAGA, within, this kind of awakening that, that really our country was at the point it was at. I mean, I was one of many who found myself in mourning because I didn't think we were at that point. And it was kind of like having the rug pulled out from underneath me. And so really this began as like an investigation of trying to figure out how I'd fit. And, it had to do with breaking the proverbial frame and figuring out how to situate myself within it. And so this was like a literal attempt to do that. And at a point in my life where I had more at risk than say I would now, in the way of having specific rights taken away or stripped down. So that was really kind of where I was coming at with it. I understood that it was going to involve me delving further into Norman Rockwell than I have in my entire life. I just, I remember like the quaint, like eye rolls, we go over to my grandma's house and she always had Reader's Digest and things like that. And from time to time there would be a Norman Rockwell image and, my grandparents would smile nicely about it. My parents were rolling their eyes, and it was just kind of part of I kind of understood as part of the Great Generations, thing. And I knew I was going to have to unpack that in order to be able to critique it and figure out exactly where I stood within that and within kind of the, kind of dancing in a conversation with Rockwell's work. And I could go on for probably about 15 minutes about what happens to an image that was first shown in a periodical as an advertisement, how that changes when it then is put onto porcelain 50 years later. And rather than putting in front of people the question of this is, who you could be if you bought Mazda lamps. Instead, it becomes an image of who we were when we sat around the piano. And then it turns into an heirloom object rather than something that you could toss in the fire, right? All these like permutations in meaning really impact the images themselves and the objects that I was working with. So yes, to Rockwell for sure, who is a complicated human being that, had to wear, he may have really loved wearing the banner of America's favorite, what is it? The Illustrator of America. However, there are all sorts of interesting kind of narratives within his own life that I think are definitely worth investigating, as his work had such a large impact on the broader American public for so long. So yes, I would say like all three areas that you brought up are important to me and do affect this work. And that's why I wrote like a essay to accompany this work, is because I learned so much through the process.
What was the book that you told me that I should look up about Norman Rockwell?
It's called An American Mirror. And I'm American Mirror. And it's I believe it's like a page turner, which is kind of wild, but yeah.
A Norman Rockwell page turner. All right. Yeah, add that to your reading list. Val, let's chat about your work.
Before I get a chance to do that, may I do a land acknowledgement?
Yes, please.
Okay. I would like to take this time to acknowledge the indigenous ancestors that inhabited the gathering place Milwaukee, from which this is being brought from. The Ho-Chunk, the Fox and Sacs, the Menominee, the Mascoutin, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Mound Builders. I would also like to acknowledge the nations that are caretakers of what is now Wisconsin. Brothertown, the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, the Mohican, the Oneida, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and other relatives that call the territory Wisconsin home. Thank you. New Beach.
Beautiful. So Val, your piece in Claiming Space is a mass of orange ribbons. It's called Kill the Indian, Save the Man. Can you just tell us a little bit about what this piece is about?
I think it is both a piece to honor those that have survived Indigenous boarding schools, those that are the descendants, such as myself, those that never made it back, and just from my own personal view, my own personal life, my great-grandfather and his siblings. So Kill the Indian, Save the Man was something that was implemented by the US government in the mid to late 1800s. And if you think about Indigenous people, when they were starting to be colonized, it was physical genocide. But the Indian problem was still on this territory. So the government decided to do this policy, Kill the Indian, Save the Man, in which they would do cultural genocide. And what they would do is they would take children off of reservations. Once, we lost our land, we were put onto reservations, and with Manifest Destiny happening, the land grab was even more, and so Native Americans or Indigenous people of this territory were moved to Indigenous boarding schools. My family attended Hayward, which is in Wisconsin. That was the first missionary school they were taken to, and then the second one was Carlisle Boarding School in Pennsylvania. Oftentimes, children were physically, emotionally, and sexually abused. They were starved. You could not practice your ceremonies, speak your language. And so it was just another form of historical trauma brought on to Indigenous people. Children that escaped, there were bounties on their heads, and they were brought back in handcuffs to these schools. And my grandfather and my great-grandfather and his sibling were the only two from the family to escape from Carlisle and made their way back to Wisconsin. So it's pretty heavy, And I think it's a story that America really doesn't want to tell, and they want to put us in the past with history and museums. And when this piece started happening, I was going through family documents again and rereading the Carlisle transcripts of my family and what they had to say about them. And then what hit was the First Nations in Canada came out with finding over 290 missing and murdered children from a residential school. Since then, of course, it happened in the United States as well. So far the count is 5,900, I believe. So it's a lot to take in, and so that's why I think statistically, right, you can read one thing, but when it takes up personal space and manifests itself, it's an easier way to visualize a tragedy, our history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly captures attention. People walk into the gallery, that whole space is just kind of aglow and humming with this orange light from these ribbons. It's, it's taller than the visitors in the museum. It takes up so much space, and then people want to know, like, what does it mean? What is it about? And then they read the title, Kill the Indian, Save the Man, and then they're like, oh. And I mean, part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this today too is to share this story, your story about your great grandfather, because I had never heard of Carlisle boarding school. I had never heard of these boarding schools that you're mentioning for the reasons you mentioned. So I think that this is extremely relevant to have in a museum, yes, but in a different way than how it may have been otherwise. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose to use ribbon, and particularly why orange ribbon? Like, what is that significance as a medium for this concept or for this topic?
Sure. In the beginning, as I said, when I was at a powwow, I was watching the dancers in the regalia, and I was thinking about ribbon applique, which is an Ojibwe tradition. I was also thinking about my great-great-great-grandfather, who was a fur packer and trader, and so he would often trade goods first to receive ribbons and other necessities, commodities. And I just felt that there's a certain beauty that ribbon has. And I think when you pair beauty with something that's grotesque, it becomes really interesting to me. And that is why I'm like on a little bit of a ribbon phase right now. And so I have several different pieces with ribbon. Usually they have text on them. But in the middle of making this piece, I believe I emailed you and I said, I'm going to leave the text off because the text I put on it is very meaningful. And I was thinking of putting survivor, but not everyone came back as a survivor. And so that's why I decided my family was one of the lucky families, if you can call it that. And so if other Indigenous people see this piece, I don't want them to feel lesser than, because if their family didn't survive quite like my family did. And orange, because that is the color of the movement for remembering your children.
Can we take a minute to look at Val's earrings? That match the piece perfectly. I love them.
I had them specially made for to coincide with the piece by a very talented artist. Yes.
Yes, I'm going to try to have her sell some things in the gift shop. I've been in touch with her already. How, and I know you only have so much control over this, but how would you like a viewer to feel as they walk into the space and see this piece? Like, what kind of an impression or an impact do you want this piece to make on the viewer?
My installation work has gotten larger scale and larger scale, and I think it's really interesting, that play between the viewer and scale. And I am a trained clay person, so I'm a ceramicist, and I am very tactile. And so I want to create something that's very visual and has that visual tactileness to it. Like, you want to touch it, you want to go through it, you want to discover it. And, you know, that's what I'm hoping they would gain from it. You can also, it's spaced a certain way because it allows breaths between each ribbon and what each ribbon represents. So when I'm making the piece, I'm putting my thought into each ribbon, each child that survived or never made it back. And so for me, it's kind of a meditative release. So every ribbon represents something, someone. And the spaces in between are just as important as the ribbon itself. And I hope the viewer can feel both engaged and overwhelmed at the same time. And maybe curious about, what is this piece really talking about? You know, I also heard comments, oh, everybody can cut a ribbon. Why are these, you know? But I'm like, you know, if you're cutting ribbon 8 hours a day, right? You know, for weeks on end, it becomes a different thing. It becomes endurance driven.
Sure.
Oh, those questions, those comments. Love hearing them. The bane of every artist's existence.
Right?
Can you talk a little bit about, you did say you're going through a ribbon phase. You have a few pieces that are made from these suspended ribbons, different colors, different sizes, different locations, and ways of installation. Can you talk about how maybe they're similar, how they're different, where else they're going to be? I know that I'm very excited to see an upcoming ribbon installation at Lawrence University.
Sure. My ribbons, some of the ribbons have to do with missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. And that is red because red is the color of the movement, and I'm an activist in the movement. So for me, it's very dear to my heart. And my work slowly started to have ribbons slowly come into it. And that was really one of my first pieces I ever did that was full-on ribbon. And so the piece at Lawrence is going to cover a whole gallery space, all the walls in red ribbon with the word justice. And that's because there's a sex corridor that runs right close to Lawrence University. And so I thought it was very prudent to have recognition of that in the state of Wisconsin. My other ribbons, I have a water piece that's coming at St. Kate's, and there's this ribbon piece. Other ribbon pieces have been more in combination with mixed media. So I'm trying to figure out how to push the medium as far as I can, and maybe I'll do some ribbon applique in spaces. But once that is complete, I think the ribbons will slowly creep back down, and I'm enthralled with like industrial felt, right? You know, it's like as an artist, you know, you're always looking for what is the next way I can use it to communicate.
Amazing. I love it. Both of you, can you, whoever, you know, has a response first, talk a little bit about how important process is to you as an artist? Clearly it's important to both of you, but like, do you have anything specific to say about, you know, how you feel when you make these things with you know, plates and ribbons and buttons? And I'm trying to think, Val, those pieces with the jars, are those like roots in the jars?
They're clay pieces, so they're hand carved. Yeah.
Okay.
So, should I go first, Niki? I don't
Yes,
want
please. Yeah, please.
Okay. So you mentioned these jars that have these things that look like roots, but they're an abstract squash blossoms. And my goal is to make 5,900, one for each missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. And that project is a 2-year span so far. And so for me, art is very much about endurance. It is very much about pushing your body, how far you can take your body. I think it reflects also blood memory. These are things I remember from my ancestors. I truly believe this, the movement, the ceremony, the dances, and also what was done to us, like how we were processed through colonialization, right? And so I just feel like it's part of my mourning and part of my healing and meditative process to work through endurance.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like hearing you talk about why you do it, it just it's like finding like a cousin language right next to, because I understand the endurance. You know, part of it is like you end up having to figure out new stretches and new routines so you can keep your body moving in the same way. As far as process, I think process is the education for me, because I have really strong gut reactions that the process allows me to unpack. And it helps me broaden my own vision and understanding of my initial response. So when you talk about blood memory, I also experienced something kind of like time travel. And like recently when I've been working with buttons, I feel like all of the strangers that I'm touching their buttons and I have their collections now, that they're less strange. Like they've become humanized through this tactile experience that we've shared. And I don't know when the last time they were touched. Same with the plates that were collected and finding the like plate of the month certificates on the inside, you know, or the Planned Parenthood signs that I used, and thinking about the people who drove by who were like, there it is, pull over. I gotta go get my birth control. It's time. You know, that was those, the materials all have their own inherent voice. And I see using them as it's collaborative, especially when you take time to like check your ego, or when I'm checking, I'll not put it on the you, I'll take it on the me. Like when I'm checking my ego and I'm just kind of walking with the potentials of what is actually in front of me. So yeah, processes. It can be maddening, and it also can be meditative, and it can be soothing in the way that as an artist, there are no promises for your career, and for a set amount of time, there's like a time clock, and you clock in and do some time, and you know that there's more time on the other side. I don't think all artists need that, but I know I find it that can be a real relief, especially when so many of my heartstrings are tied to each individual piece. Like I like to spend time with my work. It means, I mean, I dedicate a portion of my life to each piece, like months, you know, and so then they help me grow.
I'm so interested in hearing about these like very physical bodily responses to making. I mean, obviously you're doing what you're meant to be doing. And isn't that satisfying?
Right? Yeah.
How do you think, I mean, we just talked a little bit about how these materials impact you when you're working with them and how you feel about them. Is that very similar to how you feel like the materials impact viewers when they interact with your works, with these buttons, with the plates, with the ribbons? You've done the time to learn about them. You've had that initial moment of inspiration when you see the piece and you think about it as being art. But for someone viewing it for the first time, how do you think that impacts them? Being in a museum, walking up to a flag that's made out of buttons, Niki.
Okay. All right. So that's one of the best parts of being like a fly on the wall, and people not knowing your face, but they're looking at your work, is just hanging back and listening, and hearing people tell stories and put together associations and relationships with the material or the image that it creates or the physical space it takes up. That is the gift, right? Like as an artist, I feel compelled to create, and I create what I do. And then if I have the fortune to exhibit it, it goes out into the world with a name. I've done everything I can to instill it with my intentions, and then it goes and lives its own life. And I write a statement, and sometimes I'm fortunate to work with museums and galleries where people other than me are there to help guide folks down on, or at least weave in what my intentions were alongside what they're reading. But in no way is, do I make art in order to like get people to feel what I want them to feel. It's more so to be with them on kind of a journey of unpacking questions about identity. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah. When your best intentions for your work might never ever be realized, and you really, I look at it as how can this piece stand on its own, because that's part of the intention of artwork, right? Viewers bring in their own baggage that they have to whatever piece they're looking at. whether it's good, whether it's bad, or maybe it does spark a memory. And I hope that, well, I will say this, with both our pieces, or your several pieces in there as well, the repetitiveness, right? I think it's somehow soothing to viewers, I feel. And it can take their imagination into a different context. And I think that's what's really interesting about when you start looking at work that has massive repetition. I think it becomes other than. You can't explain it. It's an untangible feeling, but it's there.
It also creates a gateway, right? Because people are like, oh, I have ribbons at home, or oh, I sew buttons too, or I haven't opened a button box in forever, or oh yeah, those grandma's plates, man, we did just like those didn't sell well at the estate sale, did they? Did they go to a thrift store? You know, and so there's this way of, by using, I guess, what we've been calling kind of non-traditional materials, even though they're like the most prevalent in our everyday lives, it creates gateways for your viewers to be able to engage on a kind of a visceral, kind of affective level that, I mean, paintings are amazing. If I could paint really well, maybe I would paint, but I don't know. I just haven't found paint forever compelling, you know? So that's why I hop around. So that's, anyway, just another added thought about how familiarity can help engage a message to go further.
I've heard those comments by both of your pieces from people in the museum. Yeah, you know, who collects buttons anymore? You know,
right? Like, good question. I actually looked at my personal collection before I went button crazy, and you're in a ribbon phase and I'm in the middle of a button phase, which is, it's nice to know there's somebody crazy dorking out on one material. But like the thing with buttons, I realized that in like the 20 years that I have like lived on my own, or I guess it's been a little bit more, but whatever, that I really only have like 2 cups of buttons. So I guess like it adds up to about a cup a decade of the ones I can't throw away that are attached to things. But I don't harvest buttons. You know, it's fascinating to kind of, or really collect plates like a true plate collector. But by making this type of work, you end up learning more about those communities and about the histories and about the traditions. And all of that is just really like nourishing information. It's amazing.
All of this has been nourishing information. I have one more question for both of you, if you're willing to speak on it. What's next? More buttons, more ribbons, fun projects, another exhibition? Sitting on the couch with your cat?
I don't know. I think just exploring more materials for me, more industrial materials, tracing commerce and how that comes into play, right, with the materials we have, and how the environment plays into it. You know, as an artist, I know myself, I am, you know, I do reuse things, but I know I also exploit things, and it's just I think that's what I want to kind of explore further on. I have shows coming up, but you know, who knows what my next creation is going to be. It's whatever I spot that thrills me at the time. Niki?
Well, I do have some button pieces that I've been working on steadily that are coming to fruition. I've been patterning with Swarovski crystals for 5 years for this really big project that one day will be finished. So I'm ever pushing that down up the hill. I'm working on a new commission on a really tight deadline that I'm very excited about. So stay tuned. And there's also some curation coming up, and all this means money, which means I get to cast some work in bronze and then maybe gold plate it. So I don't know how unreasonable I can be, but man, there are a couple pieces I really want to get out. I'm, part of it is just so much of the lily pad of, what is practical, and kind of making the most of each one of the opportunities that come up. So I'm still being mysterious, but I kind of just threw a couple of things in there.
I'm very excited about the Swarovski crystals. I'm on the edge of my seat for that raccoon complex over here. Where can people find you? Website, social medias, let's throw them out there. I want everyone to follow you and keep up with what you're doing, keep up with these upcoming material explorations and crystals and gold-plated bronze sculptures.
Yeah. I'm NikiJohnson.com. That's a 4-letter word in the front, NikiJohnson.com. And you can find my blog, and I'm on Instagram. All the links are there. Other than that, I think that, apparently I'm in a well-decorated bat cave, but I can't tell you where the location is.
Mysterious again.
Yeah.
Nice.
Val?
Oh, me. Okay. Valaria Tatera. It's VALARIA TATERA.com, or Valaria Tatera art on Insta. Once in a while, I'll post my TikTok. I know, just on process, to do little films on my process, and yeah. Oh, and I'm just going to do a quick plug at Walker's Point Center for the Arts in when is that? In November. At the end of November, there's going to be a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit show that I'm co-curating with artists from across the United States and internationally.
November, you said?
Yeah.
Cool.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Claiming Space is up on display through October 3rd. Make sure that you stop by. If you've already seen it, come and see these women's artwork on display. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Niki. Thank you, Val. This has been fantastic. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, everyone.
Thanks.